Hello, this presentation is all about looking at crime and deviance and the linkage between them, but also moving forward, started looking at the causes of crime and about how some deviant behaviour will lead to causes of crime, however some deviant behaviour does not. And I always like to start off with this quote here. All criminal behaviour is deviant, while not all deviant behaviour is criminal. But what exactly does that mean? Why does it link into the course that we're going to look at? And why is some deviant behaviour actually good for society? For this, we need to have a couple of key ideas and questions. For example, what is crime and deviance? How do we decide what is and isn't criminal? And does it change over time or due to the place that you live in? Also, how does the mass media portray crime, which we cover much later in the course? And also, looking at crime statistics, how valid are they actually? How much can we believe them? And why are there big holes in the data that we get? But some of the other key things we have to think about is definitions of crime and deviance, the agencies of social control, the social construction of crime and deviance, and as I said, we look at the mass media later on about how they report crime and deviance and how sometimes they actually get them mixed up, and that kind of makes it a bit messy. So, looking at deviance itself, imagine a teacher turning up to a lesson wearing a string vest, shorts and braces with his hair unkempt and looking like he hasn't washed for a week. There he is, old Ramsay Nesbitt. Now, pretty much none of you will know who this person is, but I imagine maybe some of your parents and definitely your grandparents will know who Ramsay is. Gregor Fisher, yeah. Now, definitely a sight for sore eyes. You would not want to see this. It's definitely the norm, not the norm, you would see. But it's not actually a crime, but it is deviance. It's a deviant act in the way that it deviates away from what we accept as part of the norms of society. But sometimes it's not always bad. I'm not saying this isn't bad. I'm saying sometimes, as I said before, deviance is actually good for society. So looking at deviance, it means to basically move away or to stray from the set of standards in society. What we believe people should be like, what we believe the norm should be. Right? It's a much more general category than crime. And sometimes it's looking at how sociologists can clarify behaviour which is not the norm, the same as most people think they should be, but it's not necessarily having to be legally controlled because it's not actually a criminal act. Whereas crime is formal deviance. It's associated with behaviour which breaks the written laws of the land or a given society, and normally you're more likely to be punished or punished more harshly for a crime than you are for deviance. Now, social control. Often people think about social control and they talk about how society controls you. They talk about how society has an impact on all aspects of our lives, and some people move away from that control and they want to become deviant, and others stay within what society expects of them. So sometimes it can force you or persuade you in a way to actually follow the social norms of society. For example, all of you taking this class right now will most likely go to university because that's actually what society believes. If you stayed at school into S6 and you're doing advanced hires, the belief is, or the norm is, that you will then go into university, get a good job, pay a lot of tax, and then your children will do something very similar. Right? It prevents deviance as well, society, by forcing that whole idea about education's key, get a good education, get a good job, and move on in life that way. That's why some people, when they think back to like the 60s and early 70s, and they talk about the hippies, about how they were all like tree huggers and things, and they were deviant in a sense because they didn't follow what society thought everyone should be doing. Now, sometimes they're formal institutions, like school and the law, like police and things, or there can be informal ones, like through peers and family. Now, often what you find is when you talk about gangs and stuff, you talk about that social control through their peers, an informal one that you have to fit in if you want to be part of the gang, so therefore you're more likely to commit a crime. And that's when some deviance can then become criminal. Now, normally you can have sanctions. Now, just have a little think. Can you suggest any sanctions that could encourage you to conform to the norms of society or not? Have a little think about that. Now, there are positive sanctions, as we've said in the one before. Sometimes you might get pocket money doing some chores. You get good exam results, get a good job, you might even get knighted by the Queen. Although in reality, by the time most of you be knighted, it'll probably be someone like William or maybe George. But there are also negative ones that try and force you or persuade you not to go down the wrong path. These can be, for example, sitting in the corner, getting the bad chair, the teacher seat, the naughty seat, detention, of course. You can get fired from your job, and worst of all, you could be in prison. But remember, in other countries, the negative sanctions are not just imprisonment, they could be death. So we need to think about what agencies of social control are. What are the formal social control? What are the agencies? What are the bodies which create that social control, a formal setting? And that would be things like the police, the courts, so you can get prison time or you can get fined. Informal, as we said before, things like your parents, the education system, the workplace, the place where you work, where they expect you to fit in. School does a really good idea of this, the fact that everyone should wear one school uniform, or the fact that actually, if you want to get on and you want to be go to university, then you have to do extra tasks. So quite a few have probably been prefects, head boy, head girl, house captains and things like that, because they're all linked into that social control of this is how you get on in life by being one of these people. Now, it's always a bit strange when I see uniforms, because when I went to school, there was no school uniform. Coming from Orkney, there was two big secondaries. There was Stromness Academy, dump, and there was Kirkland Grammar when I went to school. So we had no uniform because there was no need. The idea was that we could wear what we liked, but then they brought in their own uniform, and what they did was they got the pupils involved, and they made hoodies and things, and sweatshirts and rugby shirts and things. But the idea was that if you had a hoodie or something, you had to have your name or your nickname on the back of the hoodie. So in a way that they try and loosen up that social control a bit. Whether it worked or not, some of the teachers I know would say yes, some would say no. Now, what about crime? What is it, and how do we construct it? Now, it's whatever is against the law. It's a formal law, though. It's been written down. So in this law, in this idea, it's labelled. Society, the government, everyone has come together, they've made a piece of legislation and they've formalised it and said, if you do this, then you are breaking the law. For example, is it against the law to wake up at 7:59? Right now it probably is, because the fact is, well, for teachers, not necessarily for pupils, because we've got to be up and ready to go. So we're starting at 8:45 every morning. So Newburn, 2007, said, crime is a label attached to certain forms of behaviour which are prohibited by the state and have some legal penalty against them. It also argues that no act in itself is criminal. It's only criminal when it's been labelled as a crime by the society that you live in. That's why you have different laws in different countries. That's why you have constitutions in some countries and not in others. The idea that actually some laws are enshrined, whereas other ones are a bit more fluid, so you can change them about a bit. But yeah, nothing's actually a crime until it's formally made a crime and labelled that way by the society, by the state. What about killing someone? Is it always a crime to kill someone? I can think of instances when necessarily it would not be a crime. Killing in itself is not criminal. It's dependent on the circumstance. If you kill someone by hit and run in your car, that's criminal. But if you kill an enemy at war, it's not necessarily a crime. Although you then have to look at who was the enemy, if it's civilian things. But if it's basically you or them, then it's not necessarily a crime. What happens if someone attacks you with a knife, and then basically you grab the knife and they fall on their knife? Was that actually a crime because the fact is they attacked you? These are things that we need to start thinking about when we're looking about causes of crime, and about actually how do you label what a crime is and what isn't. And sometimes that gets a bit mixed into an ethical idea, the idea like euthanasia. Is that a crime? But it all depends on your belief system, but also on the belief system of the country that you live in. Now, what about the social constructions of deviance then? Remember we said before, it's about deviation. It's about moving away or straying from what the social norms are. Now, it could be that you're deviant away from the law. or from your family. Sometimes people are called the black sheep of the family. Or even deviating around a pothole while driving. Let's face it, in Aberdeen you have to do that a lot because sometimes you can lose half your car in it. If you're on your bike, oh my god, some of that potholes are massive. But sometimes it's difficult to define what is deviant because many people disagree on what is and isn't deviant. But not only that, but depending on the situation or their cultural norms, something may be deviant to you but not to them. Now, Downs and Rock suggest ambiguity is a key feature because people don't really know what is deviant and what isn't. It's all depending on your own experiences. It's all depending on where you live, what you've experienced in life. That's what helps to create that social norm. That's what helps to create that idea of what is deviance and what isn't actually deviance. In your mind, something may be deviant, but others will not agree. For example, wearing a t-shirt has swear word in it might be cool and accepted around your friends. Night out, hey. But in a workplace or a school, that's not allowed, and that's a deviant piece of behaviour. Societal deviance, that's quite obvious. For example, what society normally have, or most of society have, the majority of things are socially normed. They have their own ideas and they actually agree broadly on certain things. For example, murder, rape, child abuse, drink driving will not be allowed in the UK as a value, right? That's not allowed. Situational, though, is when they can be agreed across whole societies but differ with other societies or groups in the society. So sometimes, or until quite recently, that idea of homosexual marriage was seen as deviant by some groups, but society as a whole actually saw it was a good thing and it shouldn't not be allowed. But you did have some religious groups, for example, who said that was deviant behaviour. So they had that idea of actually it shouldn't be allowed, but it can change over time. So it kind of proves the idea that actually no act is deviant or criminal unless society defines it that way. Because as times change, so do people. So non-deviant crime, it's kind of like when lots of people do them, they're actually quite common. They are legal, but the stigma attached to common activities is not so bad. So examples we've given here are like parking offences, when you park in double yellows, underage drinking, obviously not these two children here on the swings, necking the bottles, and sometimes like cannabis use as well. The fact is that you can smell it, they're walking about the streets, but the fact is no one really seems to be doing anything about it, even though it's illegal. Sometimes the time also talks about whether something's deviant or criminal. For example, and smoking was widely accepted in 1948. Over 85% of the population smoked. However, now it's a minority. It says 24%, but the reality is we know there's a lot of ones in that 5% who are just casual smokers. So the reality is it's somewhere around about 19%. Up until 1967, it's illegal to be homosexual in the UK. However, today gay couples can marry and are entitled to the same rights as heterosexual couples. So time does create that difference between deviance and crime. Sometimes it's all to do with society. Oh, I've forgotten to update that slide. So alcohol use in Islamic countries is deviant. It goes against the religion. But women are now allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia, but it was illegal before. Singapore, you're not allowed chewing gum. And you can be punished by death in North Korea for criticising the government. So society or culture also has an impact. The social grouping as well that you stay in, or the ones that you are hanging around with. So, for example, Rastafarians smoke cannabis, but most people, or many adults, see it as a deviant behaviour. Now, there's always been a great deal of variation in history across different countries as what's defined as a crime. Some of the major figures in history have been termed criminals by a state process that was considered legally valid at the time. Have a little pause there. Can you think of any examples? I knew you'd cheat and go straight on, not pause it. So, Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, condemned by court for the crime of corrupting the youth of Athens with his teachings, the idea that actually science should be pushing the boundaries. Of course, have Jesus Christ, who was a man, whether he was Son of God or not, we're not getting into because this is not RME, but he was condemned and crucified along with two common thieves. Martin Luther King, prison for his role in the 1960s civil rights movement, wrote his letter from Birmingham, stands as one of the classic writings of civil disobedience. Nelson Mandela. Some people then saw him as a hero after his release from prison, the end of apartheid. However, he was in prison because he was part of a group who bombed a school bus and killed children. So, time has a great impact on this, about rules and about regulations, about how laws change and about how society changes. But you need that deviant behaviour to move society to a new norm. So, are we to call individuals like these criminals? Or do we say it was a mistake to ever have called them that? And that's part of the problem, and I'm glad that's why we're not doing history right now, because lots of people look back on history and look at someone and say, yeah, but he wasn't a very nice man. Like Abraham Lincoln, for example, about he's a fantastic guy because he freed slaves, but he actually treated his slaves really bad that he had before he freed them. So is he a bad or a good man? A lot of problems, especially in America, right, they're having right now, all to do with the slavery and about that whole aspect of colonialization and slavery and about how things look different now from what was the norm then. And that's why it's always difficult to always look back on history with a completely open mind, because things were different back in those days. Now, these are ones for you to look at. Essentially, women driving. It's now only legal for women to drive. I missed the other slide. I missed it. Smoking, the fact that smoking in public places is made illegal. Rape within marriage was actually illegal until 1991. It wasn't actually an offence. You couldn't be raped by your partner. Absolutely ridiculous. Crossing the road. Jaywalking is illegal. Pedestrians can only cross the road in designated areas. Although, if you go to Italy, if it's a red light and it's meant to be for you, it just means to drive faster. So, yeah. Watch that if you ever go out that way. But just have a little look through these. See what you think. Now, what I've got now is a little task for you to do, some note-taking. You're going to watch the video on functionalist views of crime and deviance, and how it will fit into the course about causes of crime. So just take down some notes, talk about functionalists, it'll give you some of the theorists and things, talk about people like Durkheim and others, and about how basically that deviance then moves into a criminal behaviour. You're then going to read two articles linked to the assignment I'm just giving you, which gives you background on the links between deviance and crime, and make some notes to familiarise yourself with the first part of the course. The second one especially, it talks about causes of crime, and it gives you actually biological, it gives you some of the other theories that we'll be looking in more detail. That's why it's important that you take some good notes now to give you a good background, so when we start talking about a biological and a psychological or sociological theories of crime, you have a little bit of idea of what we're talking about before we go into the detail of it. And I'll just show you those articles in the video in a minute. Once you finish both of those, there's a little bit of homework for you to do. I'm going to create a collaborative document for you all. So this means that everyone will be able to share onto one document, because we're going to have to do this as we go through the course, this collaborative idea, because obviously a lot of advanced higher stuff is group work, so therefore without being able to put you into groups, this is the better way of doing collaborative documents. When I give you maybe 10 or 11 articles of stuff, you could actually all decide amongst yourselves who's doing which article, and then you're all sharing onto one document for the notes and things as well, just to make it a lot easier. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to find 10 photographs. In reality, I'll let you off with 5 because there's quite a few of you. 5 photographs or pictures of what crime means in Scotland. And then also do the same for an international comparison, so other countries, not the UK. I just want you to upload them onto the document, and that's it. Now, just so you know what they all look like, this is the video I'm talking about, Functionalist Views of Crime and Deviance. It's a 6-minute 41, so talks about Durkheim, talks about deviance and crime as well. It's very straightforward. It should all be, oh, Albert Cohen, he's good as well. Should all be pretty straightforward for you all. Right, then this will be the first article. And looking at this first article here, you can see it looks a bit strange. Why is it on Science Daily? But it's actually got a little bit here about some of the gangs and things in Chicago, which is always good. So just put down street gangs, Chicago. Or you can take down the title as well if you want. It's fine, little article. And then things like here talks about gang lifestyle's intergenerational legacy, talking about the deviant activities were accepted or expected in their families and neighbourhoods. So that gives you an idea of that deviance moving into crime, because when we're going to look at gangs and things, this would be a good example about talking about the gangs in Chicago. We also have this document as well, which I'll have, and you can see here it's got theories of crime, causes of crime. So it talks a little bit about some of the biological theories, a little bit of background, not a lot of information, just basic background to get you started, to get you thinking, just so that when we start talking about some of these theories and things, you know a tiny little bit about it. It's always good to have that tiny bit of background, just so you know a little bit what we're talking about before we go into it in too much detail. And then this is the document as well, the collaborative one. So I've got Scottish Images of Crime. Let's make that title a bit bigger. It's a bit small, to be honest. So I've already started there. Obviously, I'm not going to put any words. It's just pictures. And then we also have International Images of Crime. So all I'm looking for here is for, here we go, it's better, 5 and 5. So if you put your 5 in and put your other 5 in, now can I also make sure that when you do this, can you make sure when you click on your picture, you also get it to wrap the text, please? So you can actually drag it about. Otherwise what happens is they all become really formatted and then they'll all be halfway down the page. So make sure you just go there, do the middle one, wrap text. That means it's like an image, an object, so that people can then post them all around your ones as well. And that's it for the first 2 lessons of Advanced Higher. And next week I'll be sharing some information about biological causes of crime, and we'll start looking at some of the actual aspects of what theorists believe causes some of the crime. Thank you.